I'm Gemma Schneider, and this is Where Are They Now? Where Are They Now is a WHRB original series in which I take a deep dive into the insights and experiences of Harvard alumni who have made an impact. They are trailblazers who have touched the world in ways that they could never have planned for, expected, or imagined when they were students. And now, they are eager to tell their unique stories for the benefit of current students and our wider community of listeners out there. This series is made possible by One in a Billion Productions with Mabel Chan, our production partner and sponsor. One in a Billion is a nonprofit educational media company whose mission is to foster Asian voices and deepen cross-cultural understanding through podcast and film productions, blogs, and network events. One in a Billion's founder, Mabel Chan, is also a Harvard alum, class of '93 from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. She'll be joining us as a regular commentator and co-host on the podcast. In this episode, I am speaking with Sangu Delle, an entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and author who graduated from Harvard College in 2010 with a BA in African Studies and Economics. He received his JD and MBA from Harvard in 2016. Sangu's philanthropic proclivities and entrepreneurial energies date back to his years as a student at Harvard College. Back then, he founded the water and sanitation nonprofit Clean Aqua. Shortly thereafter, Sangu started Golden Palm Investments, or GPI, an investment holding company that builds world-class technology companies across the African continent. Sangu is also the author of Making Futures, a book about young entrepreneurs doing game-changing work in Africa. In today's show, Sangu and I speak about the invigorating and rewarding nature of his philanthropic projects on the African continent. Sangu also discusses his college days, revealing the excitement and complexity of starting his own business ventures at that early stage. But failure, too, is inevitable in all business plans, and Sangu has seen no exception to this rule. With me, Sangu talks about the trials and tribulations of entrepreneurship, about disappointment, and about the very real toll that hard work and high expectations can have on our mental and emotional health. At the end of this episode, our contributing commentator and co-host, Mabel Chan, will share her thoughts about this interview, a commentary about rebounding from failure. But before we get to all of this, we open up with a trip to the past. It's a story about how Sangu, as a child in Ghana, found his way to Harvard. It's a wonderful narrative filled with history and heart, beginning with a pamphlet, a university president, and an inspired 5-year-old boy. Hi, Sangu. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
It's my pleasure. It's always great to be connected to my wonderful alma mater.
Speaking of your alma mater, you tell kind of an origin story about when you were 5 or 6 years old, knowing from that point that you wanted to go to Harvard. And I want to hear that story from you.
Sure. So it's a bit of a funny story, because I learned how to read when I was really young. I think I was like 2, 3 when I started reading. And so my father at the time, who is he's a doctor and a human rights activist. And at the time he was working with some colleagues on this, which was novel at that time, the idea in the 70s and 80s of health as a human rights, which they were really pushing. And there was some faculty at the Chan School of Public Health that they were working with. And so he used to get some materials from there. And I remember one time seeing Harvard University on one of the materials and asking what university was. And he explained that that's where you go and you become smart. And I asked what Harvard was, and he says, why? His eyes open, and he goes, no, that's where you go and you get really smart. And so of course, I was in nursery or kindergarten at the time, and the head of my school was we had a headmaster, a headmistress, right? And so I wrote a letter to the headmaster of Harvard saying that, my name is Sangu, I'm 5, I live in Ghana. I'm told this is where you go to get really smart. I'm smart, but I want to get really smart, so on and so forth. So I give a lot of pressure to my dad, and he exasperatedly mails the letter. So we don't hear anything for about, I think, 6 or 8 months or so, and then I get a letter back from Neil Rudenstein. And so I kept in touch. I kept writing all the way through Larry Summers. And the best part of this story, I'll tell you, is that in last year, in February of 2020, we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Department of African and African American Studies at Harvard. And at this ceremony last year, I got to meet Neil Rudenstein for the first time in person, and I got to connect with him over this story, and we took pictures, and it was a very, very emotional moment for me because it came full circle.
Did he remember it?
I don't think he did, but he was very touched by the story, and we hugged, and it was great. This was pre-COVID, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. So you get to Harvard, and pretty early on, you start your own nonprofit. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, I mean, look, one of the greatest things about Harvard for me really was the inspiration to pursue social and economic entrepreneurship. So, what happened to me my freshman year? There were two people who ended up changing my life and inspiring me to start these organizations. The first was my roommate. So there was a gentleman, Darrell Fington, who grew up in inner city Indianapolis, and we connected from pre-frosh, and we spoke. He told me about his experiences, with violence, drugs, and all the terrible things that he saw growing up. And I had told him about my experience of seeing some of the scourges of civil conflict when we had the Liberian and Sierra Leonean Civil War. And because of my family's human rights work, I grew up with refugees from Sierra Leone and Liberia. I told him about some of the challenges with underdevelopment and so on and so forth. And so we both promised to each other, we're like, we need to do something to help our respective communities. And that led us to a journey of, we started College Bound to help inner city youth get into college as under PBHA, still running. And then we started what's now Clean Aqua, which ended up being a water and sanitation project that has now worked in 160 communities and helped bring water and sanitation to over 200,000 people. So that was that. I ended up writing my thesis at Harvard College on that, and it became a big part of my life.
Yeah. So instantly, I think just like being a college student, I'm so curious what that process looked like, starting all of this in college, from learning the procedural tasks to like being taken seriously by adults you're working with and whatnot. Was that a challenge? What did that look like?
So I think that there were a couple of things happening that helped, right? So part of it was I was so excited, right? I was so excited. You could literally see the passion oozing out of my pores. And I think that there's something infectious about positive energy and excitement, right? People just, it fills the air with so much positive vibes that people are attracted to that. And so I did not find that people didn't take me serious. I found that people were excited because I was excited. And I also think that the advantage actually of when you're, and I saw this, the difference as an alum, you contact people, some people will be helpful, some people may not. But everybody wants to help a college student, right? And so I actually found that, and this is why I tell people in the college all the time that take advantage of this time to reach out to anybody and everybody, right? Because everyone will talk to you because you're a Harvard undergrad, and once you graduate, they may not. So definitely take advantage of that. And we reached out to everybody. We spoke to everybody, and it was, I think part of that naivety was also helpful. We just thought, hey, we're excited about this, and it worked out beautifully.
Your thesis about Africa's growth, how did that develop?
So that was actually a very cool thing where, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, who at the time was the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies, she came up with a brilliant idea called social engagement. And social engagement became this track that she created in the department. And it was really simple. It said, instead of us learning theoretical stuff inside the ivory tower, why don't we figure out the implications of what we are studying on the lived experiences of people, right? And so it was a way in which you would take what you're learning, you'll take it into the field, you will engage with communities, and there's a duality there, because on the one hand, you take what you're learning into the field, but then what you're learning in the field will also in turn shape what you're learning in the classroom. It transformed my life, and it's so funny. I'll tell you, when I first came to Harvard pre-med, like most good African kids, you come in, you're pre-med, you're going to be a doctor. And when I switched to economics, and I decided to then do African and African American studies and economics, I will never forget. A lot of my family back in Ghana just couldn't understand. I remember there was one uncle who said, I just don't understand. He left Africa to go to America to study Africa. Like he was just, he just didn't understand why. I mean, and then he was so angry at me that I wasn't going to medical school, and he would say that there are only four options. Either you are a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, or a fool. So in his calculus, I was definitely a fool.
What does he say now?
Yeah, I think he's gotten over it. I think 3 Harvard degrees and an Oxford degree later, he's figured out I'm doing okay.
I'd say. So another thing is that while you're working on these projects, you had this sort of philosophical shift that you talk about, where you were in Ghana at a community meeting and you asked if there was a single thing that I could do for you, what would it be? And the answer was, we want jobs. And that kind of changed the way you view things, about economically empowering people rather than just giving handouts. I want to hear more about that. And I also want to hear about you have this shift in mind. How long did it take for you to kind of act on that and adjust the way that you engage philanthropically accordingly?
Yeah, it really that, and I still replay that incident in my head several times. So this is a story that happened as I my freshman year, right? When we have this community gathering in Ejimante in Ghana. And I fast forward to about 2014. So 2014, I'm in London, and there was an interesting discussion between the one of the top guys in AI. I think he was a founder of, is it DeepMind? I think it's DeepMind. And next to this founder of DeepMind was Kazuo Ishiguro, who is a Japanese-British novelist. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature. They get into this debate about artificial intelligence and of course, the founder of DeepMind is talking about artificial intelligence and how it's going to completely transform our world. And Kazuo Ishiguro was frowned, right? And he interjects and he says, "But is that a good thing? And is there something to be said about the dignity of work?" Right? And I remember at that time in London, as soon as he said that, it cast me back to freshman year, right? 2006. It cast me back to that conversation with this young man in Ejimante, who also was talking about that exact same thing, albeit in a different context, about not wanting a handout and wanting jobs, not just because of the sustainability of that from an economic perspective, but also because of the inherent dignity in being able to work. And so for me, on this journey of trying to provide opportunities for people and in trying to economically empower the marginalized, it's not just about creating, it's not just about bridging the gap, right? It's not just about giving people economic empowerment. It's bigger than that. It's also about creating dignity, giving people dignity.
Yeah. It also, it makes me think of that saying, if you give a man a fish, you can feed him for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, you can feed him for a lifetime. The kind of the whole theme, it reminds me of that.
Absolutely. But you just need to make sure that where he's fishing from has fish. If you've already depleted all the fish where he's fishing from, then you're not really doing anything.
Yeah. And you get at that in your book too, that the biggest problem is human capital, but you also speak about, financial capital and that being a real problem as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your active work on the ground for Clean Aqua involves both of those things. You're teaching people how to maintain the systems as well as helping to build them. Can you talk a little bit about that work?
Yes, of course. So look, with Clean Aqua, we realized from all the research we did that one of the leading causes of infant mortality for children under age 5 actually comes from lack of access to clean water and safe sanitation, right? I mean, you're talking of in the order of over 2 million kids a year die from that, right? It's unconscionable, and it's also avoidable. It's not like some rare form of cancer where we don't know what to do. It's very clear what to do. So that continues to devastate me, right? Just that idea. And so what we do when we go in is we put in place the water infrastructure, which often involves us building a borehole, putting a pump. Sometimes, in some cases, you might have to put a filtration system, depending on the quality of the water, to make sure that, all right, they now have access to water and it's very clean water per WHO standards. So that's a big part of our intervention, but we wanted to make sure it was sustainable. So we created a human infrastructure to manage that. These water and sanitation committees, train them, equip them, let them open a bank account where everybody makes a little bit of a contribution. I actually this year went to visit the first community where we did this project, and it's still ongoing. They still have these things in place. And the beauty is once you create that sort of human infrastructure, they're able to use that to do other things. So there was one community where we did that and they said, hey, we're doing this water infrastructure. We've already come up with a program for people to contribute. Why don't we use the same model? And, we need to build I think they wanted to build like a nursery for the young kids. And they did that, right? Leveraging that same structure. And so that's kind of the long and short of how we've been operating in these communities.
Yeah, and that speaks to what you were saying earlier about, empowerment and dignity. It provides all of that as well as kind of just like the basic ability to build and grow. I want to note also for listeners that you came to a community where someone had already set up the infrastructure, but it broke and they couldn't fix it themselves. And is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, this is where it's so important to take a holistic approach to things, right? And this is why it's important to take a multidisciplinary approach, and why when you go into any community and you want to do any intervention, it's first important to go and to learn, right? To humble yourself and to learn. When we went there was a well, right? There was well infrastructure that from a pure economic analysis perspective, what we should have done, the most cost-effective thing would have been to just rehabilitate the well. But that would have been foolish. Why? Because at some point in the 90s, a girl with severe mental illness unfortunately fell and died in the well, right? And social and cultural mores and norms were so strong that no one would ever drink that water from the well. And so we would have gone in and we would have invested in all the rehabilitation we wanted. They would never touch the water in that well, right? And so it just shows why it's really important when you're doing interventions to actually understand and to make sure that there's community buy-in, right? That it's not just an imposition of the intervention, but you actually have the community, it's a demand-driven methodology.
So all of these narratives are really ones of success. And the change you have pushed forward. Another question that I have, a topic I want to talk about, is kind of like the idea of failure in business and other walks of life too, because it's inevitable. I mean, when you have so many initiatives and so much that you're doing, like, you're gonna fall sometimes. And so I'm curious to hear about that too.
Yeah, I mean, look, uh, you know, in fact, I'm glad you brought this up, right? Because I think that it's something that we need to do a much better job of, right? Which is normalizing failure. And it's not something that I think we're, especially at Harvard, it's not something that I think we're well equipped, and it leads to mental health struggles, which I faced when I was back at Harvard for graduate school, where I had a major project I was working on with GPI. Just it became a total disaster. Where, I mean, this was such a major project. It was a $12 million project. It was a done deal. I had off takers, I had investors, I had like everything was all set. We had started the project, and then last minute, the anchor investor basically died before the funds were wired, and it just started precipitated what became a disaster for the project. And then there were some macroeconomic challenges, etc. Cut a long story short, project became a fiasco, and in all of that, I ended up getting anxiety. I ended up getting severely depressed, and I couldn't talk to anyone about it. I could not talk to anyone about it. And so, since that experience, I've fortunately I was able to get through it with the support of some wonderful friends. I went public. I gave a TED talk about this, and I've since become a very passionate mental health activist. But I'm glad that those conversations are changing, right? And that we're now creating situations where we have to realize that, look, we don't always have to be Superwoman and Superman, right? And it's okay to fail, and being vulnerable does not make us weak. It makes us human.
Yeah, you said that at the start you didn't feel comfortable telling anyone. Was that kind of just the shame surrounding it?
Yeah, look, it was the shame, it was the stigma, it was toxic masculinity, it was the erroneous idea, and my show emotions, which was just absolute nonsense and foolish. And so I was trapped by all these ideas and these tropes, the toxic masculinity ideals, and the stigma. The stigma was so overwhelming. The stigma was incredibly overwhelming that I couldn't even entertain the idea. And quite frankly, it's one of those things where in my imagination I thought depressed, anxiety, no. Those are things white people feel. As an African man, I cannot be depressed. It's an oxymoron. And of course, that's absolute rubbish. But that's, and I'll tell you, I'm not alone. That's what a lot of people, when you look at the research, you see that statistically, these ideas persist in a lot of minority communities and a lot of African communities where there isn't really a lot of room to process emotions, especially for men.
Yeah, you talk about sort of the growth and progress that you want to see at Harvard. Do you also kind of hope to bring that back to, some of those mental health efforts on the continent or for students there? Have you done anything on that front or hope to do anything on that front?
Yes. So I have. There's I'm on a number of boards on the continent. I'm on the board of Ashesi University, which is an incredible world-class university in Ghana, Pan-African University, and at Ashesi, we've made huge inroads when it comes to mental health. I mean, it's something that I've been passionate about on the board, and I'm very proud of the school for what it's done. And I look forward to actually doing more in that field in the coming months and years.
I'm really glad you brought up Ashesi, and I know you write about Ashesi in your book, and it seems awesome. I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I want to close kind of with a theme that links to this topic, as well as the broader topic of growth in Africa, entrepreneurship in general. But I know that to you, kind of inspiring a generation of young people, it's important to you, maybe one of the most important things. So what is a message that you would impart upon, young people?
Yeah. So message for young people, I would say three things. Okay. The first thing really is be kind to yourself. And because I think that I worry a lot, because I think that, especially in this social media age where everything is TikTok and Instagram, and I know I'm sounding like a grandpa saying that, but I think, and I recognize this. I'm also on the board of the Petty School, and so I see a lot of the data that comes to us on what students face, and you see it across the board. Students are feeling more stress now, right, and are feeling more pressure, and so I think it's just important to be kind to yourself, and to take care of yourself, which means sleep. If there's one regret I have, quite frankly, looking back, all of the things I did, I just didn't sleep much. And it's that the big heart.
I don't think.
Yeah. And it's a thing we brag about at Harvard. Oh my God, I only got 3 hours of sleep, and we say we're pride. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. We should not be glorifying sleeping for 3 hours because it's horrible for your body. So let's be kind to ourselves. Let's take care of ourselves. Let's eat well. Let's exercise. The second thing I would say is really take time to build community, and be intentional about it, right? And get to know people, get to really know people and their stories, and get to know people across the board, right? So not just get to know your fellow students, get to know faculty, get to know the staff, and build genuine relationships with people, because I think that's for me, that has been the most hands down the greatest contributor to my success really has been people who have gone above and beyond to help me. And then the third thing I would say is I think it's I would really encourage people to give themselves room to figure out what their true passions and dreams are. And it's difficult because you get clouded with all sorts of things, what's considered prestigious, what's not, and sometimes you're not careful, you end up going down this rat race without really figuring out, well, what truly do I care about, right? What are my real passions? And I think that self-discovery will be instrumental. It will completely transform your life, because I feel really fortunate. Every single day I wake up, I am thrilled. I'm thrilled. I mean, I don't have good days every day. I mean, sometimes you have your down days, but in general, I'm thrilled because I love what I do. I really love the work that I do. And I'm so fortunate and blessed to be in that position where I find the work I do to be very meaningful and to be very fulfilling.
Thank you for all of that. And thank you for being here and talking with me today. It was a great conversation, and I'm so happy to have met you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Sangu Delle for joining us today. Now it's time for a few words from our contributing commentator and co-host, Mabel Chan of One in a Billion, our production partner and sponsor of Where Are They Now?
Thank you, Gemma. When I listened to the first part of Sangu Delle's stories, success after success, like graduating from Harvard with highest honors, starting projects to help inner city youth, launching Golden Palm investments, getting featured in Forbes, and getting a book deal, I initially felt this was unreal. Who lives a life with no setbacks? Who can live a full life without failures? I asked the question about failure. Sangu was quick to say he was glad that topic came up, and so was I. You may remember from the interview that Sangu gave a TED talk about his struggle with depression and anxiety because he had never really experienced failure until one day a big business deal went horribly wrong. Everything fell apart when the principal investor died suddenly before the funds were wired. It was, to Sangu, a mega failure, and he didn't know how to talk about it. He felt alone, anxious, and deeply depressed. And his friends soon rallied around him and helped him get the mental health counseling he needed to get back on his feet. Well, personally, I too have had many moments of distress due to failures. Failure to get a promotion, failure to get my dream job, failure to get noticed in the workplace, etc., etc. But I've never experienced depression until the sudden death of my mother more than 25 years ago. She was generally healthy, went home after tea with friends one afternoon, then suffered a major heart attack that night. She died in the car while my whole family in Hong Kong, my dad, my brother, sister, were there rushing her to the hospital. The sudden death of someone, a parent, a friend, a loved one, or an investor you rely on for success, as in Sangu's story, is traumatic. It does not leave you the same person. It changes your outlook on life. It darkens your world. I felt deeply depressed for weeks. Then I got laid off from my job. New management took over the TV station I was working at, and the show I was producing for got canceled. Everyone on that show with me was let go. Like Sangu, I didn't know how to talk about it. I felt like a failure. Only a few close friends knew what happened. I did not seek counseling. I preferred to think things through on my own and to seek lights, praying in the dark. I got down on my knees and cried out to God, day after day, night after night for weeks. It helped to pour out grief, tears and fears out of my body. It helped that I felt empty and prayed before the Lord. It also helped that years later I began writing about my experience. Writing, praying, and confiding in close friends have been my way to rebound from distress, trauma, and failure. When Sangu said we need to do a better job with normalizing failure, I can't agree more. One way to start is to feel safe to talk about it. This podcast is a great example. We feature alumni who can share the experiences of trauma and failures, and we can form genuine friendships through our common struggles behind our success. What is your struggle right now? Feel free to send us your comments. I love feedback.
This has been Where Are They Now? Produced by myself, Gemma Schneider at WHRB News in Cambridge, in collaboration with One in a Billion Productions with Mabel Chan. The music for our show was created by Dash Chin of WHRB News. You can also learn more about our podcast partner and sponsor, One in a Billion Productions, by checking out oneinaBillionVoices.org or Mabel's podcast, One in a Billion, an interview show about Asian culture and society, one person at a time, on Apple iTunes, PRX, or SoundCloud. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode of Where Are They Now? Tune in for another episode of Where Are They Now on WHRB 95.3 FM at the same time next week, same place. In the meantime, learn more about our podcast and catch up on old episodes by visiting our website, whrb.org. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or PRX.